In early warfare, the largest number of deaths was not caused by the enemy. It was from disease. During the U.S. Civil War, it's estimated that 2/3 of the deaths were from disease, with the other third being from battlefield injuries. The Boer War from 1899 to 1902 was even worse. That led to a variety of groups looking for ways to bring that number down, and one of the first to do that were the Japanese. The Japanese had suffered similar losses to disease during their war with China in 1894, but just 10 years later, during the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 and 1905, that number dropped dramatically. That was the result of a very effective system of sanitation in their battlefields and hospitals. From there, the Japanese went on to study bacteria and disease in an effort to better understand what they were fighting, which helped future troops stay healthy while fighting in the trenches. Sometimes, though, instead of eradicating disease, they turn it into a weapon. Shiro Ishii was born on June 25, 1892, into a wealthy family just east of Tokyo. He was a gifted student who wanted to practice medicine and serve his country, so he set out on a path to become a doctor in the Japanese Imperial Army. He attended medical school at Kyoto Imperial University, graduating in 1920. Ishii joined the army after graduation and was stationed in Tokyo after basic training, but eventually returned to Kyoto Imperial University, where he earned his PhD in 1927. It was Ishii who read an article about the 1925 Geneva Protocol and came up with the idea that the Japanese military could use it to their advantage. The Geneva Protocol outlawed biological weapons in warfare, and though Japanese delegates signed the agreement, it wasn't ratified by the country's legislature, which meant Japan wasn't bound to the agreement. Ishii reasoned that for something to be banned, it must have been effective, and if all other countries were going to agree to not use biological weapons, Japan would benefit from being the only country who would. Ishii began studying the theoretical uses of biological and chemical weapons in an official capacity for the military. He claimed that producing bacteria would be less expensive than producing traditional weapons. Ishii spent 2 years traveling the world, studying American and European research institutions before being ready to set up his own facility for Japan. But they weren't about to start researching deadly biological weapons within their own country, though. The Empire of Japan invaded the Manchuria region of China in 1931 and occupied the area until the end of World War II. It was in that region of China that they opened a facility called Unit 731. The biological weapons testing facility was started in the city of Harbin, but it was determined to be too populated, making it hard to maintain secrecy. The Japanese chose a smaller neighborhood south of the city center, and the residents were forced to leave their homes. They burned down all of the structures besides a large building to use as a temporary facility while the new compound was being built. Underpaid laborers were used to build the facility in 2 parts. One housed the offices, living quarters, cafeteria, and storage. The other part is where the laboratories, prison, and crematorium were located. What started out as the Epidemic Prevention Research Laboratory turned into one of history's most brutal biological warfare operations. Its massive complex housed about 3,000 personnel and could hold up to 1,000 prisoners at once for experiments. By August of 1940, all related operations got a new name: Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. That made the facility seem like a benign research center that hid the unit's real purpose. And the real purpose turned out to be horrifying. And it shouldn't have been surprising that more was going on at the time. The place looked like a fortress surrounded by a 3-meter or almost 10-foot high wall topped with razor wire and high-voltage wire. It had a drawbridge that led to twin iron doors that made it clear the Japanese had some serious secrets within the walls of Unit 731. It wasn't long before it was well known by the Chinese that the facility was a production facility for death. The original Japanese tests of biological weapons happened during the 1939 Nomonhan incident. During a conflict with Russia, the Japanese contaminated the Holston River with gastrointestinal pathogens. All the same, that early attempt didn't work well. The typhoid bacillus lost its ability to infect in water, something Ishii's group already knew, but went ahead anyway to collect field data. Unit 731 launched at least 12 major bioweapon field trials against 11 Chinese cities between 1940 and 1943. The attack on Ningbo stands out as one of the best documented cases. On October 27, 1940, Japanese bombers flew just 200 meters above the city. They dropped plague-infected fleas, grain, and cotton strips over the city center. The first death came 4 days later, and casualties grew faster afterward. The epidemic ended on December 2nd, leaving over 1,500 people dead. Bacteriologist Huang Qitai noted several unusual things about the Ningbo outbreak. It happened in near winter instead of summer, killed humans but few rats, and involved a flea not native to the region. Qitai later testified, quote, "It is very clear that the outbreak was caused deliberately." The Japanese also attacked Chongda in November of 1941. Chinese authorities had learned from previous attacks and kept casualties in the single digits. Japan's biggest biological warfare operation took place during the 1942 Zhejiang campaign. They used cholera as their main weapon, causing over 10,000 casualties, including more than 1,700 Japanese soldiers. The lifeblood of Unit 731's biological arsenal came from weaponizing plague-infected fleas. General Ishii had refined his biological weapons by 1939. He selected 6 potent pathogens: anthrax, typhoid, paratyphoid, glanders, dysentery, and the plague. Those agents could trigger large-scale epidemics and withstand being dropped from aircraft. The facility started by having 10 prisoners begin raising fleas by putting them in heavy padded clothing, which gave fleas a good place to breed. They would regularly turn the padded clothing inside out and pick out the fleas that had grown large enough. Eventually, Unit 731 managed to keep about 4,500 flea incubators running. Each one produced at least 45 kilograms of fleas per cycle. Among other resources, they used an estimated 3 million rats within the facility walls. Farmers in the area quickly pivoted to start raising rats for the facility as a means of income. The end of World War II brought destruction to Unit 731, but many infected rats escaped into the countryside. That triggered plague epidemics across 22 Chinese counties and claimed over 20,000 lives. Shiro Ishii came up with the idea to use live rats and fleas as delivery mechanisms. Ishii created special porcelain bombs to deliver biological agents. The bombs needed minimal explosive material, unlike metal containers that required lots of gunpowder and generated heat that killed bacteria. Unit 731 produced about 2,000 porcelain bombs between 1937 and 1942. Each 55-pound shell carried plague-infected fleas and oxygen to keep them alive during high-altitude flight. The bomb would shatter into tiny fragments upon impact, leaving no evidence while releasing about 30,000 fleas. Japanese forces claimed the bombs would be ready for combat by 1944 after testing more than 2,000 of them. The unit didn't just rely on bombs, though. Japanese planes scattered plague-infected wheat and rice grains over civilian areas. It also dropped contaminated cotton wadding and paper pieces to poison crops and food supplies. By 1942, Japan found that spraying microorganisms directly from planes worked better than bacterial bombs for biological warfare. The porcelain bombs were also found to be perfect to deliver anthrax. Not only did anthrax kill people in the area they were dropped, but the spores could stick around for decades. So even after a population was killed, people would be unable to return to the area. During those experiments, the Japanese learned that children and adults contracted different forms of anthrax and that pregnant women could transfer anthrax antibodies to their unborn fetus. That led to pregnant women being exposed to low amounts of anthrax in an attempt to breed anthrax-immune children. There are areas in China that are still infected with anthrax spores today. Of course, using one pathogen at a time was amateur hour for the researchers at Unit 731. They started infecting villages with one pathogen at a time to study the effects, but then they would add a second pathogen to see how the two toxins would interact within a human population. One village got typhoid-contaminated well water, then had smallpox-infected clothing given to them 3 weeks later. The fatality rate was almost 90%, and researchers disguised as aid workers would enter the villages to take samples for their studies. The Japanese also studied the ability to create a famine in an area in order to wipe out their enemies without shots being fired. Wheat rust is a fungal disease that affects wheat, barley, and rye, which had normally seen a 20% yield decrease in crops. But the scientists at Unit 731 developed a stronger strain that would kill up to 80% of crops. They distributed those seeds in one area of the region and watched as food supplies in various villages dwindled to almost nothing. The scientists kept journals of how long the villagers lived without food depending on their demographic. They recorded the data in journals labeled Population Decline Efficiency. Shiroishi wasn't only interested in the effects of pathogens on larger populations, though. He wanted to study how the human body reacted to a number of other elements. The unit began using human subjects that they referred to as marutas, which roughly translates to logs. It was their way of dehumanizing the test subject. They forced themselves to view the human beings they were essentially torturing as logs of wood. They went even further by calling prisoner transfers deliveries, and train loads of test subjects were called freight. Instead of test subjects being killed, they were disposed of. The people who were brought into the facility were immediately viewed as inanimate objects in order for the doctors working there to detach from the actual suffering they were causing. But it's not like the doctors who worked at Unit 731 were forced to be there. No, highly trained professionals with training from some of Japan's top universities competed to get a spot there. Applications poured into the facility, and some even came with recommendation letters from professors. Once accepted, they were put through a training program where they observed procedures and were given training manuals that described parts of their job, like how to restrain struggling test subjects or proper documentation methods. Still, there was not a high level of turnover at Unit 731. Some even requested to extend their rotations to stay longer. The test subjects mostly came from a detention facility that held prisoners of war, but if they needed more subjects than the detention facility was able to offer, they would take Chinese civilians. The human experiments took on many different purposes. Some subjects would be exposed to the chemical or pathological weapons to see how well the weapon worked. They would expose men, women, children, and even pregnant women to a deadly pathogen and make detailed notes of how each subject reacted. They would not only study the way a human body reacted to each pathogen, they would note the differences between the various test subjects. How test subjects reacted with regard to their race, gender, age, and even whether or not they were pregnant. Then the subject would be autopsied after death in order to gain more insight into the effectiveness of the weapon. Not all of the subjects died from the exposure. If the weapon didn't kill them, they would be killed with potassium cyanide. Those would be the lucky test subjects who were actually dead before they were autopsied, something that wasn't always the case at Unit 731. Those horrible acts were already enough to make Unit 731 one of the worst human rights violations in the world, but doctors who ran the experiments there didn't stop with just testing biological warfare. They went on to dream up some of the most horrific live human testing that has ever been documented. The purpose of developing biological weapons became only part of what was happening at Unit 731. Eventually, doctors there started conducting experiments to study how the body reacted to a number of other factors. Wanting to document how the human body reacted to extreme heat or cold, high or low pressure, and a number of other outside forces, they began using the logs to record that data. First, they would experiment with how the human body was affected by various weapons. They would shoot different types of bullets to see the specific type of wounds they would make. They would fire at different parts of the body to record the most lethal areas to target. They would record how long a subject could live after being shot in a specific part of the body. They even used the opportunity to measure things like blood spatter and wound depth. They would take an entire family and detonate grenades near them to see how different types of grenades affected groups of people. They used pregnant women to determine if their pregnant bellies could block fatal injuries. And if that wasn't bad enough, they would also place test subjects within view of the blast but outside the zone where they would get injured. While they were blowing up one human being to study how well the weapon injured them, they were using the other human being to test the psychological effects of seeing a person get blown up. They made note of any piece of data they could possibly gain from every experiment in multiple ways. Both aspects of those tests led to the design of grenades that contained fragments that created larger wounds. Not only did that kill more people, but the people it didn't kill would be psychologically affected by the devastation they had witnessed. The logs were used to test other weapons like knives and bayonets. Flamethrowers were used on subjects that were both completely exposed and who were using protective gear. The development of fire protection equipment might have actually gotten its start during these brutal tests where a human being was hit with a flamethrower and the amount of time it took them to die was timed. Nothing was off the table when it came to experiments on the human body. Gas chambers with large windows were built so test subjects could be exposed to different gases while their reactions were recorded on video. Blisters would appear on their skin in lower concentrations and the subject would choke to death in higher concentrations. The subjects would involve people of all ages, which is how the doctors learned that children were affected by gas more quickly than adults. There were extensive tests on how the body handled electricity. Obviously, they tested how much current through different body parts affected test subjects, but also how much current would cause the most pain without killing the subject. Information that has become widely used by countries all over the world to torture prisoners. Psychological tests were also carried out when a parent would be forced to watch their child be electrocuted to death, which was actually found to reduce the amount of current the parent would be able to handle before death occurred. Outside of the flamethrower tests, subjects were studied on how much heat they could handle or how various degrees of burns healed. They tested starvation and dehydration, sometimes allowing a parent to watch their child starve to death to record their reaction. They exposed test subjects to high amounts of X-rays. They hung them upside down and meticulously recorded the effects. They even added weights to some test subjects to see how much the human body could handle before being crushed to death. A pressure chamber with a viewing area was built so the scientists at the facility could carry out pressure tests. Some were done for the Japanese Air Force, determining the effects of high altitudes, while others were out of, quite literally, morbid curiosity. High pressure and rapid decompression tests showed researchers at what levels the body would be crushed and how the body responded to rapid changes in that pressure. They learned that children lasted longer in the pressure chamber due to the malleability of their bodies. Pregnant women were studied and it was learned that a fetus died during decompression an average of 4.2 minutes before their mothers did. Some subjects would be put into the pressure chamber and the pressure would increase gradually over days. Their body would slowly adapt enough to make them able to handle more crushing before they finally died in agony. Another set of testing encouraged by the Air Force handled G-forces. A test subject would be strapped to a seat on a large centrifuge and spun until it reached up to 20 Gs. That would make the person's blood so heavy it could not circulate, but of course that would only be a problem if that person's organs weren't also liquefying inside their body. Every detail of those tests were recorded with precision. The amount of compression in the spine would be recorded, and effects at various ages were again of interest to the scientists. Elderly subjects would experience their bones breaking during rapid acceleration. One problem the Japanese army was facing in the 1930s was the cold. Many regions where Japan was engaging in battle were extremely cold, like northern China and Siberia. Soldiers were dying of hypothermia, so Unit 731 became a place where that could be researched to hopefully find ways to combat it. Physiologist Hisato Yoshimura gained infamy for his systematic frostbite experiments. His methodical cruelty earned him nicknames like Scientific Devil and Cold-Blooded Animal from military personnel. Yoshimura's typical procedure involved submerging his victims' limbs in ice water until they completely froze. It was said that the frozen limbs, quote, emitted a sound resembling that which a board gives when it is struck, when hit with a cane. He carefully documented the time it took for frostbite to develop. He tested various thawing methods, including dousing limbs with water heated to 100 to 122 degrees Celsius, holding frozen extremities over open fires, and leaving victims untreated overnight to observe how their own blood might thaw the appendage. Families would be taken out into the freezing weather nude and have water poured on their arms and legs to ensure they froze solid. Then experiments on how to thaw the appendages would be conducted. His willingness to experiment on children proved especially horrific. He subjected a 3-day-old infant to freezing tests by immersing their fingers in cold water containing ice and salt. Another documented case showed him placing 2 naked men in temperatures of 40 to 50 degrees below zero and filming their suffering until death. He eventually learned that rapid thawing of extremities did more damage than slowly thawing them out. Those details would go on to become important cold weather survival techniques all over the world. The doctors at Unit 731 were overly curious about how the human body reacted to being injected with various substances. The first was other types of blood. Of course, various blood types would be injected into test subjects and their reactions recorded, but also the injected blood from different animals. Sheep's blood killed the patient almost instantly, but horse blood gave the unfortunate recipient a few more minutes before an agonizing death. Seawater was injected as well as air. An air embolism is when an air bubble forms in a vein and cuts off blood flow. Doctors would document various amounts of air being injected in different parts of the body to learn how much air could kill a person and how long it would take. Other subjects were drained of blood to see just how much someone could lose before dying. Some of those people would slowly die of blood loss as their own children watched, so the researchers could also measure the psychological effects. Again, they wanted to document every bit of data they possibly could. While the experiments carried out at Unit 731 are clearly horrific, we aren't even to the worst parts. Studying how disease or extreme conditions might affect the human body at least has some value in learning how to prevent or treat people in those situations. But eventually the doctors at Unit 731 started carrying out experiments that should be reserved for the most gruesome fictional stories. They were getting into Dr. Frankenstein territory before the facility was finally shut down.
It's alive!
Personnel at Unit 731 would cut off a person's limbs and reattach them on opposite sides of the body. Then they would document how those limbs worked afterwards. They would surgically remove a stomach and attach the esophagus directly to the intestines just to document how the new orientation performed. Then they got into the realm of brain transplant. They started with transplants of part of the brain before moving on to total brain transplant. They started just doing stuff to see what happened. The doctors who worked in the experiments had completely detached from any recognition that they were creating the level of suffering they were. Vivisection became a practice with multiple purposes. If a doctor needed a specific human organ for an experiment, the subject would be cut open and the organ would be removed without anesthesia. The medical staff forcibly restrained struggling prisoners on operating tables. They stuffed rags or medical gauze into the victims' mouths to muffle their screams before starting the process. That would not only get them the organ they needed, it gave them the opportunity to study how the subject responded to the pain. In the minds of the personnel at Unit 731, the humans they were experimenting on were nothing but logs. They were meat to be used however they wanted. Female prisoners endured exceptionally horrific conditions in Unit 731. Doctors and others sexually assaulted many women repeatedly, which resulted in numerous babies being born in captivity. Some women were forced to have sex with infected male prisoners while researchers studied disease transmission. One witness described how a male and female, one infected with syphilis, would be brought into a cell together and forced to have sex with each other under the threat of getting shot if anyone resisted. Researchers showed particular interest in pregnant women. They infected some with syphilis during pregnancy. Women were forcibly impregnated to study how diseases passed from mother to child. Doctors would choose women with specific traits and force them to have sex with males with complementary traits. Then the woman would be subjected to a variety of tests to study how various pathogens passed from the woman to the fetus. Researchers performed live dissections on many pregnant women months after impregnation, removing their fetuses while they remained conscious. A facility member's testimony recalls seeing a dissected belly with a fetus inside among specimens in jars. At the end of World War II, with the Soviet army approaching, Japan knew that they could not let Allied forces discover what they had been doing in northeast China. Unit 731's human experimentation program had no known survivors. Prisoners who survived infection or experimental procedures were killed to enable autopsy analysis. Japanese forces executed all remaining prisoners to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence. It's believed that there were 300 remaining prisoners who were either gassed or poisoned, and about 600 Chinese laborers who were all shot. Documents were destroyed, and the Japanese military did everything it could to hide what had taken place in Unit 731. Hideo Shimizu, a former Unit 731 lab technician who joined at age 14, remembered orders to collect prisoners' bones from a burning pit during Japan's final surrender days. He received a pistol and cyanide packet to use if captured, with strict orders to never reveal his experiences. Researchers found no evidence of surviving children despite records showing numerous births within Unit 731. Before we reach the exciting conclusion of this episode, I just want to remind you that we're trying to hit 1 million subscribers this year, so before you go, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Even better, tell someone else about the channel so they could subscribe too. Then make sure you both turn on notifications so you'll always know when a new episode airs. You can also support the channel by checking out our merch at thisismonsters.com. A link is in the description. Your support is appreciated, and be kind to each other. The Soviet Union held open trials of 12 captured Unit 731 members in Khabarovsk, eastern Siberia from December 25th to the 30th, 1949. Those proceedings proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the Japanese army had prepared and deployed bacteriological weapons and that Japanese researchers had conducted cruel experiments on living human beings. The United States took a different route and secretly gave immunity to Unit 731's researchers, including commanding officers General Shiro Ishii and General Masashi Kitano. Both superpowers seemed to trade leniency for information. The defendants in the Soviet trials got surprisingly light sentences of 2 to 25 years in Siberian labor camps. By 1956, just 7 years after the trial, almost all of them had walked free. The U.S. government's highest levels arranged a cover-up. They wanted Japanese biological warfare data just for America, claiming they needed to keep it away from, quote, falling into other hands. They even paid former Unit 731 members between 150,000 and 200,000 yen for their cooperation. A deep ethical question emerged. Could Unit 731's research value justify giving immunity to war criminals? American authorities claimed the data was, quote, of such importance to national security as to far outweigh the value accruing from war crimes prosecution. After being granted immunity, General Shiroishi was hired by the U.S. government to lecture American military officers about bioweapons. He then moved back to Japan, opening a clinic in Tokyo where he provided treatment for free. He died of laryngeal cancer in 1959. So the next time you're treated at a hospital, undergo surgery, or especially if you're treated for frostbite or hypothermia, the technique used to save your life might involve research gained from the experiments conducted at Unit 731. So thank your doctor for letting you use anesthesia before going under the knife. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases in criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.